Morning, friends. And today is a novel one for us here, though Patsy did inform me earlier on that we're nearly 3 years old.
Wow.
My goodness me, how time flies. But on today, we have a first for this group is someone has published a book and is coming on to tell us all about it and the things about it. So, without further ado, I hand over to speaker of today, Jeffery Smith. Jeffery.
Thank you, friends. Well, as Ray says, I wrote a book. I started writing it a year and a quarter ago, and I published it 6 weeks ago. I'll do a screen share to show you the cover.
Pedro.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. If people mute themselves while Jeffrey's talking, then or then they won't pop up and occupy the screen. But now he's sharing, we're okay. Sorry.
Okay, friends, here's the book. The book cover. It's slightly larger than life on my screen. It's called Insulate with 2 exclamation marks. Mass retrofit of houses in England and Wales done by clubs of owner-occupiers. And on the screen, you'll see the front cover with those words and my name on it, and a drawing of a cross-section of a house. It's in fact a house, a London-type house, and it shows insulation, where insulation is to be fitted. To the top left, you'll see a picture of myself and parts of the cross-section, which is the rear, parts of the rear house. And you also see an ISBN number. So if you go to the bookseller, I'll be very glad if you do that and buy it through the normal channels, because that will sort of start to open up the normal channels. So I'll now stop share for the moment and I will start to read. So the first portion of my talk is verbatim from the start of the book. Planet Earth is in grave risk of a climate catastrophe. We have all learned this in the past few years. You are troubled. You can't help being immensely saddened. You feel desperately, if only I and my family could do something. You wonder what you can do about your house to mitigate its carbon footprint. This book says how you can insulate houses, perhaps like yours, better, and not just the loft. You club together with neighbours, bring in expertise, and eventually a retrofit builder who takes charge of your street. They install thermal cladding externally above your ground story window heads, a bit like putting an overcoat over your house. And during working day visits, they fit thinner internal wall insulation to ground story walls on the inside. They anticipate the need to slightly alter kitchen units, boilers, pipes, cables, etc., so the insulation can fit in. They do other necessary things to make the house function correctly, now that it has better thermal insulation. The setup will allow for human foibles and, for instance, sudden illness of residents. Costs may be met by a retrofit building society loan paid back over 10 to 20 years by amounts that are similar to recent heating bills. Insurers are involved to cover unexpected situations and also to provide workmanship warranties. This is important as full retrofit should not cover over significant cracking or defects due to poor previous alterations. The builder must repair these first. This way, you very significantly reduce emissions harmful to the planet. Other ways of achieving something like full insulation are mentioned. Some ways to best do this are yet to be devised. So that is the start of the book. You might have gleaned, I have in mind, the reader I have in mind is a layperson who is anxious in the ways I start to say, and they talk to their neighbours. They might even set up a WhatsApp. They talk to their neighbours and say, let's try and do something. And the idea is if sufficient numbers of neighbours who are get together on the same street or possibly the next one, that they, excuse me, I've lost the trace now. Yeah, if sufficient people get together, that they work out how they can form a retrofit club. Now, I will just show you two more images on the screen share. Hopefully you can see a cross-section of a house.
Yep.
Can't hear it. Is that the case?
Yes.
Good, thank you. And now I'll show you a cross-section after the work is done, or after the principal work is done. So now you can see it with some labels. They're probably too small for you to read. If you see my cursor, I'm pointing to something above the front window of this house. That's the front window. Street somewhere here. Hopefully you can see the cursor. Here it says insulating thermal cladding fitted to outside of wall down to ground story window head level. And then up here it says proprietary eaves extension incorporating thermal insulation and repositioned gutter. Another important component is the ground story insulation, which I am advocating is internal. So here in a broken line it says thin insulating lining fitted to inside of ground story external walls. And the final label says enhanced loft insulation up here. So I'll continue now. I'll give you a sort of précis of what's in the book. Mainly the book, but there are 15 appendices or about different aspects of houses and buildings and you name it. I'll come back to that a bit. Chapter 1, subtitle, Things Necessary to Know Before You and Your Neighbours Set Up a Retrofit Club. I put these in like scenes, as if it's a drama. Anxieties, a WhatsApp group, a general meeting of the street, retrofit of houses, about it, getting things together, the managing consultant or broker, what a retrofit project consists of, money, cost of borrowing, insurance and permissions. And then I have a case study. Each chapter, there are 5 chapters. Each chapter has a case study. So I'm actually reading that from the book. Case study 1. The first mass retrofit. The residents of Green Street formed a committee. Its chair was Kate, who had recently retired as CEO of a housing association. Deputy was Quentin, still a partner in an architect's practice. Stan, a builder, was thought a key person to be part of things. Zini was treasurer, though initially all that meant was banking subscriptions, £100 per house. It was thought important to have Marie, who lived in the Brown Street cul-de-sac, which was adjoining in, and Gertrude, the hairdresser. She seemed likely to hear the sentiments of all involved, or at least all women involved. There were 10 houses on Brown Street, actually 12, but 2 were buy to rent. With 40 houses in owner occupation on Green Street, 50 was thought a suitable number to set up viable contracts. Following a very affirmative general meeting of the owners, the first job was to appoint managing agents. At least that's what they called them, since there were no retrofit consultants in existence yet. They looked at various ways at medium-sized architects based in the city. For instance, they looked at a firm of chartered surveyors in the city 40 miles away, a practice which was strong on building surveyors, those trained more in building technology than property values. They looked at a setup run by a friend of a vociferous woman at the far end of Brown Street. An important consideration was that they recognized it may be best to choose another consultant to design and manage things once funding was in place. But a case might be made for the same managing agent to be designers and contract administrators. In the end, they chose solemn building surveyors. They had 5 partners, so if one left and one was ill, at least there was someone from a pool of 3 who could run the Green Street retrofit. Someone who knew someone in Diddley Building Society said maybe they could lend the money. How much was at that stage unknown. Kate and Quentin took advice and decided work at each house might cost £20,000. Adding for fees plus VAT worked out at £30,000. So 50 houses might mean a budget of 1.5 million. It did seem that the numbers of houses involved brought down costs per property to a useful degree. In fact, they kept with solemn surveyors as contract administrators. Using documentation they had produced, they went out to tenders from a list of medium-sized builders. But other things had to be involved before this stage. Insurers were considered to be a crucial part, and 2 kinds of them. It was not so much fire or flooding, and in any case, each house owner had their own insurance for these and other perils. It was to cover the unexpected. Another aspect of insurance was to monitor designs and to provide warranties. Though their houses were all built at the same time, around 1900, some addresses were known to have had owners that had not maintained them well, and some dubious alterations had been carried out in some cases. Also, subsidence had affected the rear kitchen wing of 2 houses near the canal. Between themselves, having taken advice, the committee set out warranty insurers based in the City of London. They had been assessing quality for a number of housing association projects. They had their own technical consultants. The hope was that the warranty assurers would provide at least 15 years of cover once the work was done, much as the builder of a new house may provide a 10 years assurance through their national body. So there we are. That's a case study, really the nitty-gritty bits of it. I'll move on to what chapter 2 has in it. Its subtitle is Possibilities for the Retrofit Club Setup. And there are scenes. One is the Retrofit Club. Another is funding mass retrofit. Another is the life plan approach. I'll come back to that. Another is the government role. Basically, I avoid having a government role as much as possible. I think we're more likely to succeed without one. There is one aspect I'll come back to, however. There's a section called Search and Remediate. Basically, very intense surveys will be needed, and I'm advocating what I call an eye in the sky, plus theodolites and things. Basically, I want a full dimensional survey of all houses in the street at all levels. And then I want some artificial intelligence. So someone's got to set up a scheme of that sort, and that will look at whether there are irregularities, whether any party wall has got a bulge in it, whether any rear or external wall has a bulge in it, which in the old days, you had to get somebody on a ladder with a plumb bob and measuring offsets all the way down the wall. It took forever. The idea is an eye in the sky, as I call it, or there are things like this being done already called points surveys. You may have seen one of them if you watched either something about caving or a program about what is beneath the city of Naples. A computer interprets lots of readings and makes a picture of what it sees, as it were. So these can all be presented in such a way, programs written, and sort of automatically someone can check, is there a hidden defect which has to be attended to? And I once, when I was in my consulting engineer practice in London, for instance, was told about a house whose party wall was bulging. That is the wall between two houses. So it was bulging towards one side and away from the other. Now, these people had insurance for subsidence, and the insurers said, yes, we'll pay for it to be rebuilt. So the two occupying families had to move elsewhere. The insurers paid for alternative accommodation. We took the whole wall down, or nearly all of the party wall, 9-inch thick brickwork, 230 millimeters for the youngsters here. But I think many of you went to school and learnt inches. And that wall had to be rebuilt. So my process needs to determine any defects in the street that need to be put right before a cladding is put over them. Because once a cladding is put over, that's the last chance you have to see any defects, such as cracks. So we're not into just hiding cracks to forget it. What we're into is repairing cracks so that they do not come back. Another thing that I think will happen after full insulation is condensation will be reduced or eliminated, and therefore mold also. This does imply a certain amount of ventilation of the house, but having humans occupy a house implies having a certain amount of ventilation in the house too. And there is stuff about how ventilation, it may in fact be a small unit in each room that is a heat exchanger. So that is sort of things that are in chapter 2. At the end of chapter 2, there is a case study. I have a case study at each chapter end, but I'm not going to read all the case studies. Case study 2, the second mass retrofit. Thunberg Street. The second MR project members had chosen a steering group with versatilities as good as the first. A builder was got onto site within 2 years of the retrofit club being founded. Here, the selection of houses was more varied. 4 short terraces, 5 pairs of semis, an old vicarage, and round the corner, some 1920 council-built terraces. So, 50 houses in all. A key factor was having sufficient number of properties adjacent since there would be coal bridges caused adjacent to and by a house without external wall insulation. This meant a number of retrofit designs had been deployed. They got some advice for free when a local college interested in becoming a university of retrofit had supplied assistance. And a regional builder founded 80 years ago before, now headquartered in a former 19th century industrial magnate's mansion, had taken on an enlightened interest. On inviting tenders for the retrofit, Civic Plunge got the job. They had taken on a variety of urban renovations in an intelligent way and wanted a project to, as it were, learn mass retrofit. And they did this well, despite the continuing lack of skills due to the government not being able to make up for losses caused by Brexit. The project completed effectively, possibly being assisted by clement summer weather. So here we are at chapter 3, subtitle, including a picture of the sorts of things your experts need to do to set up contracts to carry out mass retrofit. There are various scenes. One is surveys. I mentioned about surveys already. I interjected that in the case study. But as I say, surveys are both condition surveys and measured surveys. Then there's something about current insulation levels, which are fairly minimal, as we all know. And there's something about external wall cladding. You might remember I showed the external wall cladding going down to ground story window head level. That is so that it goes below the first floor. First floor tends to be timber joist built into brickwork. If we do it wrongly, we could end up causing a dew point where the timber joists sit in the walls. A dew point means condensation. Condensation means risk of decay. Although, of course, many Victorian timbers were from virgin forests and they are not very prone to decay. However, we need to have some certainty. So that's why the external wall insulation is used for most of the house, for as it were 60% of the house, if it's a two-story house, that is. It goes down to the window head at ground floor level. To do that, we have to have a new type of gutter. There's stuff about new types of gutter. Then we get on to appearance. Of course, the whole appearance of the house and the street is altered because there will be cladding. We don't know what, someone will have to decide what the cladding looks like. Here I go into something about absurdity. The English are quite good at absurdity. However, it's an absurdity too far for the planet to be fried because we can't handle the situation. Going back to the appearance of the street will look different. I lament this. I remember when streets will look neat and tidy. They don't do that often nowadays because in many cities, bay windows have been replaced badly and few original windows exist, and modern plastic frame windows look pretty dreadful, particularly when each house has got a different type. The next two pages are black. And after that, I say, well, the reason they're black harks back to a book, almost the first novel, called Tristram Shandy. And of course, Tristram Shandy isn't born until the second half of the book. So there's lots of goings on in the first half of the book before the person is born. However, the writer remembers his friend Yorick, And it says, alas, poor Yorick. And then Lawrence Stern has 2 pages black. So this is the way I lament the loss of the English street. The English street will be new after this, and people will have to put up with it if this all happens. Moving back from absurdity to actuality, ground stories. I advocate they're insulated internally with a very superior form of insulation. There were a number of reasons for that. One is I like a brick wall. I feel much happier with a brick wall just outside of me, protecting me. If it's got a covering of something soft, the local young lads might get their knives out and start cutting into it, or somebody might inadvertently back the car into it and damage it. All this will mean the cladding has to be repaired, and repairing cladding is probably not the need for that is best avoided. I go on to various other technicalities about roofs and how they're constructed. And by the way, quite a bit of this book is rather gossipy about recalling things which I knew when I was working on houses in London. So I even quote a builder who said something on a street in Peckham 35 years ago. I talk about certain sorts of defects which happen in particular in London houses, which is the incorrect removal of chimney breasts. People saw something on the telly last Tuesday, and on Saturday they get their sledgehammer out and knock out the brickwork of the chimney breast, thinking they will have a larger room. And of course they do have that, but they forget that the brickwork above is just hanging there. They might put a bracket in, but even a bracket may not be sufficient. So that's a sort of defect which, when retrofit gets into London, needs to be known about. I'll now go on to chapter 4, subtitle, The Event, about what will be happening during the key time that retrofit work is actually underway in your street. And there's about the arrival of the builder. The first thing that happens is he sets up his tea making facilities. Things go on. Then there's stuff about external wall retrofit methods. Some methods might involve craneage, lifting things in. I even talk about gluing it onto the walls, but that does imply that the walls are not wet, which might imply that somehow you have to dry the walls out. There could be other ways of doing retrofit. Right at the start, I say that this book is not a treatise. Somebody else might write a treatise. This is a book to help the layperson be bold enough to start it all. Then there's information about internal wall cladding. There's something called aerosol. And if you've ever been in outer space and worn a spacesuit, that might have kept you from freezing. It's obviously very expensive, but I think if there's a bigger market, then products suitable for almost like wallpapering the inside of a house might be available. So that's an example of something yet to be developed. In the meantime, there may be other ways of doing internal insulation, although they may be more tricky to handle. I do talk about an umbrella for the building or the buildings. That is a scaffolding each side and beams across the top, and nice noisy corrugated sheet roofs. That is for when, for example, the gutters have to be replaced. Gutters have to be replaced to project further beyond the external wall cladding. I'll move on to chapter 5. Subtitle, Final Stages, about finishing off and follow up and how to encourage others. There's something about leftover houses. Now, why is there a leftover house? Well, somebody might have died the week before the work was due to be done. The insurers are ready for this. They know that. They take the house out of the project. And the idea is they come back to do that house a year later. And they've got money by means of insurance, because it's likely to be more expensive to do a single house than do many at a time. I talk about energy use to be monitored. And in fact, one of the very first things the club can do when they set up is to start reading their energy meters and making a note of what they are. And then in the future, they can look at what the energy meters say and compare how much they've saved in energy and therefore in carbon. I talk about a passport for the future. Once a house is done this way and it's been correctly repaired first, an enhanced retrofit passport can be issued. This is attached to the house. So when it's on the market, the new owner gets the passport. And I see this that towards the end of the 21st century, people might be buying houses which have got an enhanced retrofit passport. And some of these people may not die until the 22nd century. So we are enhancing houses, in many cases built when Queen Victoria was on the throne in the 19th century, so that they are there in the 22nd century and suitable for use then, and low in the carbon effects. I will show the pictures briefly again and just talk about those. So hopefully you can see cross-section of insulated house. I showed it you before, but here is the external wall insulation from the eaves down to ground story window head. Here's the internal wall insulation. Here is a proprietary eaves extension system. The eaves have to be opened up, a special piece is put in, and then the gutter refitted outside the cladding. And the cladding could be 20 centimeters thick. And then in the loft, probably the best thing is to take out any insulation that's there now and put new quilting in. During the book, I do talk about whether wool should be used as quilting. There are people in the fledgling retrofit industry who think wool should be there because other forms of insulation might be high energy, but wool might not be. I do admit that I don't know that I've had some jumpers that got moths in them, and I'm not sure how we could stop moths getting into the insulation in the loft if it is wool. But there may be things in future that mean that's possible. I'm nearly finished now, and I'm just going to read one of the appendices that cover many things. One is excerpts from the English House Survey, which is produced annually by the government. One is about the volume of mass retrofit, and it's showing that if this happens, and for all houses to be done by 2040, that the mass retrofit industry will become bigger than the house construction industry. Next appendix is about the English house, and I talk about Victorian houses, Edwardian houses, etc. The next one is about unusual house types. I mention concrete panel construction. I mention post-war methods, which sometimes include cross-wall construction, and the front and rear walls are just panels that are fitted on. Various things like that. There's an appendix about non-standard construction. There's an appendix about altered houses. Then there's one about house walls and roofs. Background information for lay people, this is. There's an appendix about measurements, metrication and bricks. Changed from inches to centimetres, took place 40 years ago, and that's about that. There's a list of items from the Architect's General Guide to Structural Surveys, published in 1985. That was a report on the sort of defects that affected houses, structural defects. Appendix 10 is about bay windows. Now, lots of houses have bay windows, and I lamented how they'd been poorly altered already. I even suggest that in future, bay windows may be made in like motor cars are, and bay windows will replace the ones that are there now, which are probably poorly altered original ones. The next appendix is about the construction professions: architects, civil engineers, structural engineers, builders, party wall surveyors. And it mentions the party wall surveyors get together in the Pyramus and Thisbe Club. Appendix 12 is about a national building agency. I admit that I used to work in a body called that, and I'm saying that guidance on that from such a body is necessary for the whole nation's houses to be retrofitted. And I did mention universities of retrofit. People in building surveying departments have to get together and put together their experience of how retrofit is done. Appendix 12 is about decarbonising other UK buildings. There's a note from a television programme about that last year. Appendix 14 is the grand drama of retrofit and the cast list. This starts off, the cast list includes resident house owners, 2 house residents, 3 the sick and frail, 4 those dying, 5 babies, and we go on right through to the end. The vicar, minister or imam. Number 59, the Secretary of State for mass retrofit, because no government has properly addressed the issue, and it is to be hoped they soon will. Number 60, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, whose job is not to charge VAT on mass retrofit and preparations for it. The last appendix is 15, and I will read it. It's not long. Letter to the Guardian, February 2023. It is truly shocking that a person has been tried while being prevented from explaining in court their motivation to the jury. Insulate Britain. Excuse me, I'll just move this, stop the screen share. I'm a bit dark, but I hope you can see me. I'll start the letter to the Guardian again. It is truly shocking that a person has been tried while being prevented from explaining in court their motivation to the jury. References to Insulate Britain activist jailed for 8 weeks for contempt of court, 7th of February. By what definition is this justice? There are possible defences in law to the charge of causing public nuisance in these circumstances, but David Nixon, who had taken part in a road blocking protest for Insulate Britain, was unrepresented in court. It is clear to everyone, and should have been clear to the judge, that climate catastrophe will cause considerably more nuisance to all those in the court and outside the court than the actions of a climate activist. Nixon was acting on my behalf. We all need to be protected from a myopic government that is hell-bent on growth at any cost. D.L. Kingston upon Thames, London. Well, thank you, friends, for hearing me. By the way, so far, I've not heard any observations from anyone who has read the whole book, but it's still only 6 weeks since I published it.
Right.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. That was concise and an interesting gamble through your book. Right, I will open the floor now for questions and comments to Jeffrey, please.
I'm wondering if there are any suggestions that could be made for someone living in rented, unfurnished accommodation. Are there things that I could do in my flat which would help with insulation? It is an Edwardian building.
Thank you, Patsy. Yes, you will notice the very key point in the title. This is how clubs of owner-occupiers get together. And you realise that if you're renting from a social housing provider or from a local authority, they can do very similar things without you having to form a club. So that happens already. If you're in a block of flats, this is already happening. And of course, we all know it went dreadfully wrong 6 years ago at Grenfell Tower because they used the wrong sort of cladding. It was flammable and it should have not been flammable. So that another sector of people who live in houses are people who rent. Now, I, to some degree, do, Patsy's right, I sidestepped that in my book rather. But the hope is, in a sense, that, let me say as well, it's very, very important, really, for all houses to be done. If you live in a house adjacent to one that was not done, there will be quite a bit of cold bridging. That really means heat escaping from your house into the cooler house next door, and to some degree out of its external wall, which is only a foot or so from where you are. So there's a lot to be said for all houses being done and none left out. Now, obviously, it's very, very likely that most streets in England have got a number of houses that are owned by somebody who's not a resident. I would hope that others in the street could locate the owner and say to them, look, we all want to save planet Earth, stop it being fried. We'll find a way of you joining our club. Now, there are implications there because of costs, and I don't really want to try and unscramble all that. Whenever I can in this book, I leave it to somebody else to unscramble the difficulties, quite frankly. I'm not trying to be a know-all who I'd be very foolish if I was, because there'll be unknown issues that are yet to be discovered. Anyway, I do hope people in the street will look up who owns number 43 and get in touch with the owner. Yes, there we are.
Marion? You're muted, Marion.
Yeah, I mean, just going on from that point, I mean, a lot of landlords, I mean, we hear a lot about landlords who are not very good landlords, and I can't see them being very interested in retrofit because the costs of heating usually devolve to the tenant, so they wouldn't be very bothered about that. And whether they would be thinking about climate change and contributing, what was it, 30,000 to the general cause. If they're not a very good landlord, I guess they won't be very interested in contributing 30,000 just for the sake of the planet. So I can see that there might need to be some extra incentives, perhaps from government or from somewhere, to help those. I don't know what you think.
Yes, thank you, Marianne. Well, you've taken the words out of my mouth to a degree, but I would observe that a few years ago, the government obliged landlords to improve their houses by a certain date, and I think that was by about 2024. However, I think they've gone back a bit on this, and I'm not a student of landlord things, and but
I think they did go back on it, and I just sort of thought, and it was a billed as a sort of a kind of I don't know. It was presented as a sort of a kind of relaxation, a bit like not putting the price of petrol up, and being kind to people. But actually, I saw it as a kind of a rather flagrant example of social injustice.
Well, I agree, and this was only a few months ago, isn't it?
Yeah.
What I would say though is, if the landlord thinks ahead a bit more, if the end product is that his house is very well insulated, then it's a selling point for new tenants, because they won't have such high electricity bills, heating bills. So, and there are landlord organisations, so to some degree they need to be got on board. But I'm very much aware that there's lots of promotion needed for this idea. You might, in a way, it's promotion of my book. Well, I'd be quite happy to sell 10 million copies. I'll be at least a millionaire then. But my bigger wish is that the nation starts doing it. So that's the background.
Angela?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with your basic premise that we do need to do something about our housing stock, not least because of climate change, not least because we've only got one planet and we've only got one housing stock here. But I think there's a historical problem in that when I was growing up in World War II was called jerry builders. That's probably an offensive word now, but buildings for what I would call ordinary people have, it seems to me, always been put up as cheaply as possible, with as cheap materials as possible, as possibly as shoddily as possible, and sold for as high as possible, and as much money made out. You know, I think it's called capitalism, isn't it? I think there has to be some change. We've got to make revolutionary change in this country about our housing stock. I totally agree, Jeffrey. You know, for 3 years in the early 1960s, my then husband and I went to New York to live, and we had a flat that was well insulated, everything you would want, and cheaper than, you know, he was a chef and I was a secretary. So there are structural problems. It's only, I think, having the right legislative framework in Westminster, and then enough money, perhaps with councils, to be able to put building regulations that will begin to make the revolution that you want, Jeffrey. I want your revolution, but I think it's, you know, you've got to step by step put in place the building regulations and so on and so forth, so that you don't get another Grenfell Towers, because I think that is that's lying over us, isn't it? Lying over anything that needs to be done. Yes,
well, I go along very much with what you're saying, Angela, but the amount of jerry building is an interesting question. Is it 5%, 10%, 50%? In most cities, there are houses that were built from, there are many houses built from round about 1860 onwards, or 1850 onwards in London and in the bigger cities. I was my practice when I was a consulting structural engineer and building surveyor in East London took me into many houses. There was a time when I worked for the National Building Agency and then offshoots of that, and I went into many houses then. There are often bits of stuff that went wrong, and was often jerry building, but it's not as bad as all that, is my assessment. And furthermore, if there is a badly built house in the street, we've got to identify it and we've got to decide what to do about it. And surveyors who have got expertise, and I did talk about universities of retrofit, people have got to work out what to do about it. And just to conclude this comment, I was once involved in a project in southeast London where about 4 people wanted to add a story on their Victorian terraced houses. And an architect was doing this, and they came along to my practice to look at this. I don't remember the details because it's at least 30 years ago now, but they had, I assume we'd underpinned the houses so that they could take 50% more load because there was 3 stories there, not 2, or equivalent to that. But the builder called me along and said, look here, they were in the loft starting to build up for the next story. And he called me along and said, look here, I can lift these bricks off. And indeed he could do. And so there wasn't enough lime in the mortar, which a bricklayer had used in about 1875. So my hypothesis was that he was building on this Saturday morning. He didn't have enough lime to make a proper mix, but he was under a lot of pressure to finish it, and he wanted to get to the football match that afternoon. So the hypothesis is that there was some substandard work. And what did we do? Well, I said rebuild the new brickwork should have some stainless steel brick reinforcement in it in a number of courses so that it spread the load equally and that there was an equal weight holding down the whole of the wall, even though it had got substandard mortar. So I didn't have to ask everybody, 2 families, to leave and rebuild their wall, although that has happened in another house in Hornsey in North London. So yes, there's a lot of jerry building around, and possibly there's been a lot more, and possibly a lot of such builders sent contributions to Conservative Party in the last 15 years. There we are.
Hattie, you wanted to say something. You're muted, Hattie.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know it's a small point, but if you're talking about eaves extensions, will the eaves be available to birds? Because that's often where some birds nest, and we're losing them too.
Well, I'm not sure if eaves were built with the intention of allowing birds to live in them ever, although you get some ornate Victorian vicarages and it looks a bit like that. Anyway, there might be such things. I've come across, I had a similar comment once about swifts. I think it was swifts, not swallows, swifts.
Swift
They
foxes.
like to, sorry, it was proposed that there should be a proportion of bricks that have a hole in them so that this bird could go and make a nest inside the brick. And a local person had this great concern. Well, I'm all for the bird and things and their families, but I'm also hoping the planet won't fry. And anyway, the Club of House Builders can put their heads around this one, and the Club of Retrofit people can put their heads around this and do what they can do.
Chris?
Yeah.
Chris?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. There's one or two other things I want to say afterwards.
On ensuring that tenants also can benefit from a retrofit process and proper insulation. If the tenants are tenants of a large landlord, that may be private landlord, a housing association, or a local authority, then it would seem one of the first steps would be to form a tenants association. That also has the advantage that that's another way of communicating with the government about the legislation we need on an urgent insulation retrofit programme.
Well, I very much hope a tenants association will be formed in these retrofit streets, and I'm sure they'll talk to the owner occupiers. I mean, we're getting near to housing politics here, aren't we? And I'm not unaware of housing politics, but it didn't seem a thing I could especially put in the book. But I'm very hopeful that people who are fortunate enough to be an owner-occupier, and what will happen in 10 or 15 years' time, I do not know. But you've got to start. My book is about how owner-occupiers can do something. Previously, they isolated houses got done, but unless adjacent ones are done, it's may not be worth it. And also economies of scale can happen if groups of houses are worked on.
Well, we've got someone today who calls herself Mrs. This iPad, so go ahead.
Sorry, it's Mary. Jeff, I'm going to recommend my daughter buys your book. Shall I tell you why?
Yes.
Her three-bedroomed house built in the 60s caught fire through the wiring on the solar panels, which is not uncommon. She has 4 external walls and a new roof space now built, but some of the internal walls have to be rebuilt. And she's hoping to get the property rebuilt, being very eco. I just wondered if you've any other comments to make would help her.
Well, friend, if you could tell me your name, and because I don't think
it's Mary Bailey.
Mary
Bailey.
Mary
Bailey.
Bailey.
Oh, sorry, Mary. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't recognise you, and the
No
iPad put me off. Anyway, okay. Well, I would hope that there's insurers are going to pay for all this. In other words, I hope there was insurance in place. It doesn't necessarily follow that there is insurance in place. People are putting solar panels on roofs. Whether they told their insurance company, I don't know. If they did, whether the insurance companies set up any provisos, I don't know.
No, the insurance is fine. That's covered. She's got a year's rent to go somewhere else as well.
Oh, goodness, right. Well, I mean, does she know people in the street? Or is she residing a long way away from this particular damaged house?
She's employing what she calls an eco-architect. So the whole of the interior has to be rebuilt.
Yeah, I understand there's major wage works in the guts of the house, but what I'm advocating is that houses should be done in groups. And
I realise that. Yes.
So what I'm saying is, does she know the neighbours? And between them all, do they know lots of other people in the street who could form a club?
Maybe.
So if they buy the book, and she enthuses and tells the neighbours and others, they start talking about it. then the book might be some use to them.
But meanwhile, of course, she's trying to re-establish the house so one day she can live in it.
Yeah, I can't really, I can see the difficulties there. I don't expect retrofit clubs to form very quickly, or at least they may form, but I don't expect them to be active and effective very quickly. So it's quite a tall order to try and incorporate that into your daughter's situation, it seems to me.
David.
Okay.
David.
Yes, I can think of this question's repeated 18 to 20 million times by any number of people, wondering what the risks are and so on. We had a citizens' assembly in Bristol some time back, and one of the main recommendations from the citizens' assembly was that the council should facilitate a process whereby whole streets of demonstration of best practice for tackling climate change were created as examples. So that's collides quite comfortably with what you're talking about. And the injunction here is that the council at least promotes this and helps develop it, because I think this is quite a risky business and a difficult business for any individual person in a street to start to undertake to try and bring everybody else in. And in case anybody hasn't noticed, climate change is accelerating. Whole houses are on the point of being blown down in resorts and Jersey and so on, because the winds are getting stronger and stronger. And and we seem to be tackling this in the most remarkably Victorian and leisurely way. So I think we need to find a way of. It's great. First of all, the book's great. It's lovely. It's great to have these first ideas put there, but I think we need to grab ourselves by the scruff of our necks and organize ourselves. If it's done on a street by street level, then you risk having an individual in a street building up a bunch of energy, getting their street to do it, and then that knowledge being completely lost while we wait for another street to do the same thing. And there is absent the council doing this, there's a group coming together in Bristol, a resilience network, to locate at community hubs the skill sets for making communities and their community centres more resilient. And we've just got to think of ways of doing this and raising the finance efficiently. Otherwise, a wonderful idea and a terrific essay just sort of sits on a pile and gathers dust. And I have one. Everybody's got their practical question, but one that I've noticed is that once you have applied retrofit measures to a house, guess what? When you want to sell the house, the surveyor comes along and says, well, I can't see what's under the retrofit measures. I'm not sure whether there's damage there or not. I can't give you a survey for this house. You can't sell it. So these things, the unintended consequences of good actions need to be thought through ahead of time. And I throw that gauntlet on the ground as a challenge for communities to come together and solve with their councils and solve these problems properly.
Mm. Well, David, can I just say, I did talk about enhanced retrofit passports. They are things, a statement or a document that says any defects that should have been put right before the cladding was added was put right. And the surveyor and also I do talk about the putting together of experience is a very important part of this. which is why I call for universities of retrofit.
Yeah.
So people who did it, especially practitioners, can share notes, and somebody can write a treatise about one particular way of doing it or another. So in 5 or 15 years' time, surveyors will not be confounded by a retrofitted house. They will know how to handle it. The future will be very different in many ways, as we all know. And this book tells you some of those ways. And I am in touch with an organisation called Green Register, who are Bristol based, but do national, operate nationally, training practitioners in green measures and how to green houses. And I have had quite an interesting response from them, and it may be that I'll be talking to them sometime next year. So, and I almost see them as the first university of retrofit, and I've said that to them, and they've not run away in a fright.
And the Centre for Sustainable Energy are also part of Retrofit West. So there are a number of bodies coming together to do these things. But what you have put together is exemplary, wonderful. But I'm just saying it needs to be brought together in such a way that real projects start to happen. Interesting to note that Bristol Central Quakers already houses the project manager of a group doing wind turbines, and I'm working on a solar project. So maybe Quakers can be instrumental in pulling people together. Great stuff. I'm really glad that you've written this book, Jeffrey, and that we're first up to see the fruits of your work.
Well, that's kind of you to say.
I want to see it, turn into concrete initiatives, or other than concrete, brick and insulation.
Thank you for your nice words, David. Friends, it's not insignificant that David bought a copy of the book 2 or 3 weeks ago, so he has fingered it.
Right.
All true.
Right. Marion? You're muted, Marion.
It was the case studies. Were they actual things that had happened, or were they
No,
hypothetical?
They're figments of my imagination. They are hypothetical.
Yeah.
They are things I hope will happen in the future. Although I did have certain individuals in mind who I've worked with, who I allude to in the first case study, but I'm not going to ever tell anybody who they are.
And the second factual thing is your book self-published or published through a sort of a publisher?
It's self-published.
Right.
I was looking for a publisher earlier this year, and practically none of them replied. When you say hello, would you like to publish my book? You get next to no reply. I did go to the London Book Fair, and that is quite an experience. There were about 400 tables, small desks with people sat at them who were, I think, book agents who were hoping to sell licenses to people from other countries for their book to be published everywhere. Anyway, I soon decided there wasn't much hope there. So what I did, I put an advert, a small ad, at the back of Private Eye. And I said, is there anybody who can help me publish my book about retrofit? And the same afternoon, a man emailed me saying, had I thought of Kindle direct publishing, which is done courtesy of Amazon. Well, I tend to prefer to keep a distance from Amazon. But anyway, and then a few days later, somebody else contacted me and said more or less the same thing. And he said he could be an agent for me doing it by means of Kindle direct publishing. Kindle, of course, is an ebook, but they do paperback you can do it as a paperback or even as a hardback. So I have published it. It's self-published by myself. I named the publisher MR Editions, and that's me. At least it is at the moment. I'll be very happy if loads of people come along and want to take over all this, and then they can become MR Editions. So broadly speaking, that's where we're at. There is a Kindle version of this, or rather there are two Kindle versions, because you can get one version that's a facsimile, and you can't read it on a Kindle reader, but you can read it on your app on your screen, or there's the flowable wording type of Kindle, which is you have on a Kindle reader. And the latter, I've just published it that way a few days ago. So
Thanks.
that's £6.
Yeah, because that leaves you with the problem of distribution, which is
well, that's why I'm keen for everybody to go down to Waterstones and order it, and get their neighbours to go to Foyles and order it, and get their neighbours to go to an independent bookseller and order it. And I am thinking of advertising this in other ways. There's a magazine that's to do with
what's the price?
People who do up their own houses. So I'm doing various ways.
And what's the price?
The paperback is £10.99.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Hattie, you wanted to say something?
No. Not me.
He's muted.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Patsy, number one thing you can do to help yourself is draft proofing.
Mm.
That's cheap and cheerful and very, very useful.
Mm-hmm.
I could put you in touch with a window man if there's windows and doors, but a PVC window man who is very, very knowledgeable about all PVC historic windows and doors. He's going to come and do my draft proofing around the whole house. Thinks it'll take an hour or two, including around my front door. Second thing I wanted to say is I had an interruption during this, and it was somebody at my front door who was talking about windows and insulation. So I asked him to please put his card through the door. He's from a family-run business, and actually it was a very nice, non-pressured conversation we had through the window. I thought that was very appropriate. I've been to 3 retrofit meetings, which have been run by Bristol Energy Network, which is in conjunction with the Centre for Sustainable Energy and Bristol City Council, etc., half a dozen of them. And those were really, really interesting and enlightening. And I'm going to put some insulation on the walls downstairs on my southwest facing wall, because that's where the prevailing wind is and it chills the whole house. And so I think the idea of other people in the street being interested may well come about. I try to put on our WhatsApp group anything that I think is, of interest along those lines, including the retrofit meetings, which have now finished, unfortunately, but that was funded. Yeah. So good for you, Jeffrey. I'm really impressed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that I think has been a very interesting meeting with lots of comments from friends and good involvement. And again, congratulations, Jeffrey, on your publishing, and may it succeed and grow, because as David said, we certainly need these things these days very quickly.
Thank you.
Then, the next thing we have, you'll be surprised to hear, is from yours truly. I know out there you're all book readers, and I know you enjoy a good novel and maybe a non-fiction and all this type of stuff. But I want you and your friends from other meetings and people outside of it to come along and experience the next week's thing, which is titled Good Reads. What are friends reading? So do come along next week and tell me. Because as you know, I can ramble on for hours, and we don't want that, I think. So without due on that, friends, it's as the two runners would say, it's good night from here.
Good night from us.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Yes. Goodbye.